I think the business side is interesting, but I think a lot of people out here admire you as a person and a leader. And I'm so going to shift to the personal side, and then we get the questions from the audience very soon. I have 2 or 3 of them. I remember you once said in a radio interview that you talk to your mother every single day you call her.
Sometimes 2 or 3 times a day.
So I have a different question now. You're now a mother yourself. Do your daughters call you every single day?
Of course not. Are you kidding me? We text them, both of us text them every day. And sometimes they don't respond to me. I say, text the daughter. Maybe they'll respond to you. They respond to him more than they respond to me.
And I think there's a couple of follow-on questions. A lot of people out here who are probably having college-going kids. Actually, there are some who some of those daughters are out here. So how does this whole thing work now in the modern thing? When you were a child in the relationship you had with your mother, whom you always credited as a big source of your success, is a very different world. And now it's a very different world out there. So what advice would you have for alumni mothers? Especially, in a place like Singapore, in the US, you can go send your daughter from Connecticut to Yale, but here they send them 8,000 miles away. So how do you, what's your advice on that whole thing of managing this relationship, daughters and sons, and how do you actually do this?
How do you manage the relationship between me and my daughters?
But not just you and your daughter. I think as college-going kids in general, people want to stay in touch. Not everybody calls their mother every day.
It's tough because young people today don't want to be bothered by mother's call all the time. My mother, I call her 2 or 3 times a day. And if I miss one of the calls, she'll say, "Did you forget me?" I'm like, "No, I just talked to you 3 hours ago. 3 hours ago I talked to you, I didn't forget you." That's because she has to ask me if I had lunch every day. I will have lunch if I'm hungry. She's forgotten I'm a grown woman. I can make all these decisions for myself. But then my calculus is, she's getting on in age. Nobody else is going to call and ask with that much of care. Our kids think we're a pain in the ass because we call them. All that we want to know is they're okay. That's all we tell them. Get into the house, text and tell us you're inside and the door is locked. And they say, "No, we're not going to do that. We're grown up enough, don't try to baby us." That's one point of view. We come from a different time and a different culture. We grew up differently. I think young kids, especially in the US, they're like, "Mom, stop it. You're embarrassing." But they will call and say, "How are you, Mom? How are you, Dad?" But we can't call. What do you say? You agree? What's your answer? I don't want to speak for you. What's your answer? That's my husband. What's your answer?
Anytime they want something, they'll certainly call.
Anytime they want something, especially the next part of this relationship, right? We talked about the mother, you as a daughter, we talked about you as a mother, but there's something in between, which is your husband. And I remember the very famous thing in Aspen when you said, "Raj, you're there somewhere in the priorities." So I'm not going to ask you this question, I'm going to ask Raj this question. What has it been like to be the spouse of a successful career woman, and what has it meant for you?
Awesome.
I'm sorry, there's
There's only one answer. Awesome.
One of the wise colleagues of mine once said, all you have to do, Raj, is to say, "Yes, dear." And if you do that, life is good. And whenever I follow that advice, it's worked very well.
Like when?
I do suffer from senior moments all the time, or most of the time, and that's when I get into trouble. But to your other question about the aspirants should interview, that I think everybody has seen billions of times that keep asking me about why I was not on the list or something. I was just
You weren't on the list.
Sometimes you have to be very careful what you ask for, right? And when I was at the bottom of the list, I felt I should be higher up and didn't quite realize that being on the list is a dangerous thing. So let me give you some context. So when I was talking about not being on the list or being on the bottom of the list, I used to be working all the time. And when I came home, I felt that I was being ignored because her mother and her daughters and Anyway, so it was all of that. And then, after having worked for some time, I stopped working and I was hanging around. And then all of a sudden I discovered that I got elevated to almost to the top of the list because then I went to this wise colleague of mine and said, hey, what's going on here? He says, you're suffering from what I've been suffering all my life. And I said, what's that? Well, you've now started getting the honey-do list. And I said, what's a honey-do list? Well, you don't know what a honey-do list is? I said, no, not really. She says, well, it's when your wife says to you, honey, do this, do that, do this, do that. So that's why you got to the top of the list. So you have to be very careful what you ask for. Sometimes it's best not to be on that list.
Raj, I think so it's quite obvious that you've managed very well, and I think the fact that you've been able to talk about these things is an inspiration to all the men in this room. Most of us have better performing wives than we. We just don't like to admit it.
No, but let me say something honestly to all of you. When you have a very high-powered job, and if you're traveling, your job, your mind is always on the job, and you have kids, and you worry about all these things, the person that hurts the most is the spouse. Because you take them for granted. And when we talked about the list, Raj was right because it was PepsiCo, yeah, because I have 260,000 employees and their families depending on me. And I was always the focus of every outsider who was looking at my performance. So that consumed a lot of my time. Once PepsiCo was off my mind, it had to be the kids because they're my kids, our kids. But mom is mom, and I have 2 daughters. We have 2 daughters, so the kids were very important. And my mother was getting old, so my mother's very much in my reference. I remember I have to call her 3 times a day, otherwise she says I've forgotten her. And so I assumed Raj was the vertical, not one of these rows, but a column that cut across everybody, right? That he'd be happy that I was happy in my job, he'd be happy I was taking care of the kids. That's my assumption, okay? But I tell the story, and you all might relate to it. I had this horrible old flannel nightgown. When I'd come from work and put on this flannel nightgown with holes everywhere, my kids would love it. Because that was the indication I was never going out. They would sort of run into the flannel nightgown and hug it. Raj would come from work and say, oh God, not this flannel nightgown again. So now you have to decide. Do you want to dress decently because your husband's coming home and God, forget it. The kids love the flannel nightgown. I always pick the flannel nightgown. Because the kids needed it. Alright? The kids needed it. And, thank you for putting up with it all.
Another thing that amazes me is, when you talked about this whole thing of balance and all that, right? How do you find the time? You've written to parents of people in PepsiCo and said, thank you for sending your children. I must tell you that over the last 1 week, I wrote to Indra at 11 a.m. on this Monday morning and said, leave you in Singapore, will you talk to us? At 5:42 p.m., which is 5:42 a.m. in New York, I got a response. I've had about 30 responses to quick things. Are you okay with selfies? Are you okay with video? Are you okay with this? And she's like amazingly quick to respond. And again, how do you sleep at all? How do you find the time?
That's a genetic malfunction.
No, but how do you actually do this? How do you actually maintain this balance between your obligations to your Pepsi thing? How do you find the time? Forget the balance. How do you just find the time?
Remember, PepsiCo is no longer in the picture. So,
yeah, but you just replace it, Amazon.
Yeah. But, I think it's in the mind. I don't think you can do it all. Forget the kids part. Now the kids are grown enough. But everything else you want to do, you can't do it all unless you develop certain skills to be able to do it all. I speed read. I speed read like you won't believe it. I will go through a book, in 2 or 3 hours, and I will retain everything I read. So I'm not skipping through pages. But that's something I had to train myself to do because if I didn't speed read, I couldn't survive in my job because there'd be binders and binders of material that would show up for me to review. So what you can't do is to say, oh God, how am I going to manage through all of these conflicting priorities? You have to decide, okay, I'll take a speed reading course. I'll take a course on how to extract logic out of a complex presentation quickly and put it down. You've got to invest your time in doing things like that. And then don't say, I have no time for myself. You got to figure it out. Your time might be speed reading. All of a sudden it went from listening to music to speed reading your presentations became your time. There's only 24 hours in a day, remember. You have to figure out how to stretch it. Nobody's going to do it for you. So don't sit there and complain because, for me, I'll speak for myself. I decided I wanted to move up in a career. I decided I wanted to be married. I decided I wanted to have kids. Okay? If I want to somehow make it all happen, I've got to develop new skills in order to survive. So that's the reality for men and women. It's not just for men, not just for women, for men and women.